Captain Lee Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the Iron Mountain, watching the stars drift past through the main screen. His cybernetic arms hummed softly as he adjusted the controls. The metal replacements had saved his life 3 years ago when pirates tried to board his ship. Now they made him stronger, but they also reminded him every day that space was dangerous. The Iron Mountain was one of Earth's finest warships. It carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon and had shields that could stop almost anything. But Lee knew that weapons and shields were not what made humans feared across the galaxy. It was something else entirely. "Captain," called Commander Park So-min from her station, "I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors." Lee turned to face her. Park had been with him for 5 years, and she had never been wrong about communications. If she said something was strange, it was worth listening to. "What? Kinda strange?" Lee asked. Park frowned at her screen. "It's a signal, but it's very old. The frequency hasn't been used for thousands of years, maybe longer." Lieutenant Kim Tae-woo looked up from the weapons station. He was young, barely 25, but he could hit a target the size of a coin from 1,000 kilometers away. "Who would use such an old frequency?" "That's what worries me," Park said. She pressed more buttons, and the signal became clearer. "It's coming from the silent zone." Everyone on the bridge went quiet. The silent zone was a place where no one went. It was a region of space where signals went in but never came out. Ships that entered were never seen again. Even the Galactic Council had marked it as forbidden territory. "Are you sure?" Lee asked. Park nodded. "The signal is definitely coming from the HFY system, right in the heart of the silent zone." Dr. Choi Yoon-ji walked onto the bridge. She was the ship's doctor, but she also knew more about alien life than anyone else in the fleet. "Did someone say the silent zone? That's impossible. Nothing has ever come out of there." "Something is coming. Out now," Park said. "And it's trying to talk to us." Lee made a decision. "Put it on the main screen. Let's see what it says." The screen filled with static. Then slowly an image appeared. It showed a creature unlike anything they had seen before. It looked like it was made of water and light, with skin so clear you could see through it. The creature's eyes were large and filled with fear. "People of the stars," the creature said in broken words. "We are the Velthari. Our world is dying. The Drachmon have come to destroy us." The image flickered, showing burning cities and dark ships in the sky. The cities were beautiful, made of what looked like living crystal. But now they were breaking apart under heavy fire. "We have heard stories," the creature continued. "Stories of the Deathworld warriors, beings who fight when others run, who help when others hide. Please, if you are real, help us. We will give you everything we have." The signal cut out, leaving the bridge in silence. "Deathworld warriors," Kim repeated slowly. "They mean us, don't they?" Lee nodded. Humans had earned that name because Earth was considered a death world by alien standards. The gravity was too strong. The weather was too violent. The animals were too dangerous. Most aliens thought it was impossible for intelligent life to evolve on such a hostile planet. But humans had not just survived Earth, they had thrived on it. The constant danger had made them tough, creative, and willing to take risks that other species would never consider. When humans reached space, they brought those qualities with them. "What do we know about the Drachmon?" Lee asked. Dr. Choi pulled up information on her tablet. "Not much. They're mentioned in some very old records. The Galactic Council classifies them as extinct, but those records are thousands of years old. If they're in the silent zone, maybe that's why no one ever comes." "Out," Park suggested. Lee studied the star map on the main screen. The silent zone was far away, and getting there would mean crossing through territory controlled by 3 different alien governments. None of them were particularly friendly to humans. "Sir," Kim said quietly, "the Galactic Council says we're not supposed to go there." Lee turned to look at his crew. These people had been with him through battles, disasters, and long months in the dark of space. He trusted them with his life, and he knew they trusted him with theirs. "What do you think?" he asked them. Park spoke first. "Those creatures look terrified. If someone was destroying Earth, I'd want help." Kim nodded. "We have the best fleet in the galaxy. If we don't help them, who will?" Dr. Choi was quiet for a moment, then said, "The Velthari offered us everything." "They have. That suggests they're desperate. Desperate people don't lie about needing help." Lee felt something warm in his chest. This was why humans were different. Other species made decisions based on profit, politics, or safety. Humans made decisions based on what was right. "Send a message to Admiral Yoon," Lee ordered. "Tell him, we've received a distress call from the Silent Zone. Request permission to investigate." "Sir," Park said. "What if he says no?" Lee smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Then we'll have to decide if we're going to be good soldiers or good humans." The crew exchanged glances. They all knew what that meant. Following orders was important, but saving innocent lives was more important. "Message sent," Park reported. Now they waited. In a few hours, they would know if their mission was officially approved. But Lee already knew what his answer would be. Regardless of what Admiral Yoon said, somewhere in the Silent Zone, creatures made of water and light were dying. And if there was one thing humans couldn't stand, it was sitting by while innocents suffered. The Iron Mountain continued its patrol, but now it had a destination in mind. The Silent Zone was waiting, and with it, the first real test of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of monsters. Admiral Yoon Jae-sung read the message 3 times before he believed it. A distress call from the Silent Zone. In 30 years of military service, he had never heard of anything coming out of that cursed region of space. He sat in his office, aboard the command station, looking out at the Earth fleet anchored nearby. 12 of humanity's finest warships floated in formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. Each ship represented years of human engineering and the lives of hundreds of crew members. "Sir?" His aide stood in the doorway. "Captain Lee is requesting an immediate response." Yoon sighed. He knew Lee well. The man was a good officer, but he had one dangerous quality that all humans shared. He cared too much about strangers. "Tell Captain Lee that his request is approved," Yoon said. "But he's not going alone." 2 hours later, the strike fleet was assembled. The Iron Mountain led the formation, followed by the Thunder's Edge and Void Stalker. 9 other ships joined them, including the stealth vessel Shadow Strike and the engineering ship Forge Master. Sergeant Major Lim Hyun-woo stood in the armory of the Iron Mountain, checking his equipment. His ghost company was the finest unit of Marines in the fleet. They specialized in impossible missions and fighting in places where normal humans couldn't survive. "Sergeant Major," one of his Marines called out, "do we know what we're fighting?" Lim shook his head. "Something called the Drachmon. Beyond that, we know nothing." "Good," another Marine said with a grin. "I was getting bored." Chief Engineer Han Bo-ra was less enthusiastic. She stood in the engine room, running diagnostics on all the ship's systems. Going into unknown space meant they couldn't count on finding supplies or repair facilities. "Captain," she called Lee over the communication system, "I'm reading some unusual energy patterns ahead. We're approaching the edge of the Silent Zone." Lee stood on the bridge, watching the stars change color on the main screen. Space itself seemed different here, darker somehow. All ships, reduce. "Speed!" he ordered. "Stay in formation and keep your shields up." As the fleet moved deeper into the silent zone, they began to see why it had earned its name. Floating in the void were pieces of metal and crystal that had once been spaceships, but these weren't just any ships. They were the remains of hundreds of different species, scattered across light years of space. Dr. Choi studied the wreckage through the ship's sensors. "Captain, these ships are from dozens of different civilizations. Some of this technology is thousands of years old." "How many ships are we talking about?" Lee asked. "Thousands," she replied quietly. "Maybe tens of thousands." The bridge crew fell silent. They were looking at the graveyard of entire civilizations. Lieutenant Kim began analyzing the weapon damage on the hulks. "Sir, these ships weren't destroyed in battle. They were systematically taken apart, like someone was studying them." Commander Park picked up new signals from deeper in the zone. "Captain, I'm detecting active technology. Something big, moving." Through the wreckage fields. On the main screen, they saw it. A ship that looked like it was grown rather than built. It was black and silver, with surfaces that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The vessel was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Iron Mountain. "That's not like any technology I've ever seen," Dr. Choi said. "It's part machine, part biological." The bioship moved through the wreckage like a shark through water, occasionally stopping to examine pieces of destroyed vessels. As they watched, mechanical arms extended from its hull and grabbed a section of alien technology, pulling it inside. "It's collecting samples," Lee realized, "learning from every species it defeats." Chief Engineer Han accessed the fleet's database. "Captain, I'm cross-referencing the technologies I can see in that ship. It contains elements from at least 50 different species." 50 species that are now extinct, Park added grimly. The fleet continued deeper into the silent zone, avoiding the patrol routes of the bioships. They passed through regions where entire solar systems had been stripped bare, their planets reduced to empty husks. "How long has this been going on?" Kim asked. "Based on the oldest wreckage," Dr. Choi calculated, "at least 5,000 years. Maybe longer." Sergeant Major Lim joined them on the bridge. "So we're dealing with an enemy that's been perfecting their techniques for millennia." "Yes," Lee said, "but they've never fought humans before." Lim smiled grimly. "Then they're in for a surprise." As the fleet approached the Kethvar system, they began picking up more distress signals. The Velthari were still broadcasting, still hoping for help. But now their messages were more desperate. "Our cities are falling," came one transmission. "The crystal gardens are burning. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us." Chief Engineer Han began working on the ship's weapon systems. The standard Earth weapons were powerful, but she had an idea. Using pieces of alien technology they had found in the wreckage, she started building hybrid systems. "What are you doing?" Lee asked. "Giving the enemy something they've never seen before," Han replied. "They've absorbed the technology of 50 species, but they've never encountered human creativity." She showed him her designs. The new weapons combined human engineering with alien power sources and targeting systems. The result was something that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. "Will it work?" Lee asked. Han grinned. "Only one way to find out." The fleet reached the edge of the Kethvar system and stopped. Through their sensors, they could see the Velthari homeworld. It was beautiful, covered in crystalline cities that sparkled like jewels. But dark ships surrounded the planet, firing down at the surface. "How many enemy ships?" Lee asked. Lieutenant Kim counted carefully. "At least 200, sir. All different sizes. And we have 12 ships," Commander Park noted. Lee studied the tactical display. Any sane military commander would turn around and call for reinforcements, but the Velthari didn't have time for reinforcements. They were dying right now. "Signal the fleet," Lee ordered. "All ships, prepare for combat. We're going in." "Sir," Kim said carefully, "the odds are not in our favor." Lee looked around at his crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy into the most dangerous region of space to help complete strangers. They were about to face an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations. "Has that ever stopped us before?" he asked. Park smiled. "No, sir, it hasn't." "Then let's show these Drachmon why humans are called Deathworld warriors," Lee said. "All ships, advance. Time to save a world." The human fleet moved toward the battle, outnumbered nearly 20-1. But they carried something the Drachmon had never encountered before. They carried hope and the absolute refusal to let innocents die while they still drew breath. Behind them, the silent zone stretched away into darkness, filled with the remains of species that had fought and lost. Ahead of them waited an enemy that had never known defeat. But the humans were coming, and they had never learned how to give up. The Drachmon collective mind registered the new arrivals with something that might have been confusion, if such a perfect system could experience confusion. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever voluntarily entered a battle zone to defend strangers. High Priestess Thelara knelt in her flooding temple as the crystal walls cracked around her. Her translucent skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her large eyes reflected the fires burning across her dying city. She had sent the message into the void with little hope, but desperation made even impossible dreams seem worth trying. Then the impossible happened. Ships appeared at the edge of their system. Not Drachmon ships, but something else entirely. 12 vessels that moved with purpose and deadly grace. Captain Lee Dae-ho watched the enemy formation through the Iron Mountain sensors. The Drachmon ships were unlike anything in the human databases. They looked grown rather than built, with surfaces that shifted between organic curves and mechanical angles. Some ships seemed to be part plant, others part insect, and still others resembled no Earth creature at all. "They've absorbed so many species," Dr. Choi whispered, studying the biomechanical designs. "Each ship represents the death of an entire civilization." Lieutenant Kim was already analyzing their weapons and defenses. "Sir, I'm seeing energy signatures from at least 30 different weapon types. Some I don't even recognize." "They're confused," Commander Park reported, monitoring enemy communications. "Their signals are chaotic. I don't think they know how to react to us." Lee smiled coldly. "Good. Confusion is a weapon we can use. The Drachmon Prime, the collective consciousness that controlled the swarm, attempted to process this new development. Its perfect logic circuits, enhanced by the absorbed knowledge of countless species, could not understand why 12 small ships would challenge 200 larger ones. The human fleet split into 3 groups. Captain Oh Min-ho took the Shadow Strike and 2 escort ships to the far side of the planet. Chief Engineer Han led the Forge Master and 3 others toward the largest concentration of enemy ships. Lee kept the Iron Mountain and the remaining vessels as the main attack force. "All ships," Lee broadcast, "remember that we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for people who believe in hope. The first attack came from the Drachmon. Hundreds of energy beams lanced out from their bioships, each one calibrated to destroy conventional alien vessels. But human shields weren't conventional. They had been designed to protect ships in Earth's radiation-filled asteroid belts and solar flares. Shields holding at 90%, reported the defensive officer. The Drachmon Collective paused. Its weapons should have destroyed those ships instantly. These new creatures possessed technology it had never encountered. Lieutenant Kim fired the first human salvo. Chief Engineer Han's hybrid weapons sent bolts of pure energy, enhanced with alien power cores. The beam struck a Drachmon bioship and tore through its adaptive armor like it was made of paper. The enemy ship exploded in a burst of green fire. The collective felt the death of that vessel like a physical blow. For the first time in millennia, the Drachmon hive mind experienced something approaching fear. On the planet below, High Priestess Thel Ara watched explosions bloom in the sky above her world. The strangers were actually fighting. Someone had heard their call and come to help. Sergeant Major Lim Hyun-woo prepared his ghost company for deployment. Their mission was to reach the surface and evacuate as many Velthari as possible while the fleet battled in space. "Listen up," he told his Marines. "We're going down to a water world to rescue fish people while fighting monsters that eat civilizations. Just another day in the Corps." His soldiers laughed grimly. They had trained for impossible missions their entire careers. The transport ships broke through the atmosphere under covering fire from the Iron Mountain. Below them, they could see the crystalline cities of the Velthari partially submerged as the planetary bombardment cracked the ocean floors. Captain Oh Min-ho's stealth ship Shadow Strike had circled around to attack the Drachmon command vessel. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with biomechanical tentacles that reached out to control the smaller ships. "Beginning infiltration run," O reported quietly. The Shadow Strike was humanity's most advanced stealth technology. It used adaptive camouflage and quantum dampeners to become nearly invisible. As it approached the command ship, O could see the alien technology up close. The hull was alive, covered in what looked like scales that shifted color and texture. Mechanical ports opened and closed like breathing, and organic sensors swept the area constantly. But they were looking for conventional threats, not a ship that could mimic empty space. Dr. Choi watched the surface battle through the ship's sensors and made a crucial discovery. The Drachmon ground forces were connected to the collective mind through biomechanical implants. Every soldier, every weapon, every vehicle shared the same consciousness. "Captain," she called excitedly, "they're all connected. If we can disrupt that connection, we can cause chaos in their entire force." "How do we disrupt it?" Lee asked. "Doctor," Choi was already working on the problem. "Human thoughts are chaotic compared to their perfect logic. If we can introduce that chaos into their network, it might overload their system." She began developing what she called a chaos virus, a program based on human creativity, humor, and the beautiful illogic of sacrifice for others. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Major Lim's Marines encountered their first Drachmon ground troops. The enemy soldiers were horrifying combinations of organic and mechanical parts. Some had multiple arms ending in weapons, others moved on legs that were part insect, part machine. But the Drachmon had never fought humans before. They expected logical tactics, predictable strategies. Instead, the Marines used pure human audacity. "Grenade out!" shouted one Marine, throwing an explosive device while running directly at an enemy position. The Drachmon Collective tried to calculate the logic behind such a move and failed. Why would a soldier expose himself to fire while attacking? The delay in processing allowed the Marines to overrun the position. High Priestess Thelara was evacuating her people from the flooding temple when she saw the strangers for the first time. They were shorter than Velthari, with thick bodies and skin that wasn't transparent. But they moved with deadly purpose, fighting creatures that had terrified her people for weeks. "This way," Sergeant Major Lim called to her, speaking through a translation device. "We're getting you out of here." "You came," she said in wonder. "You actually came." Lim helped her onto the transport ship. "That's what humans do, lady. Someone calls for help, we answer." Captain O Minho had reached the Drachmon command ship and was placing explosive charges throughout its organic corridors. The biomechanical walls pulsed around him like the inside of a giant heart. "Charges set," he reported. "Beginning extraction." "Negative," came Lee's voice. "Plant Dr. Choi's virus in their central processing core first." O nodded and made his way deeper into the ship. The virus upload took only minutes, but those were the longest minutes of his life. Around him, the ship's immune system was beginning to recognize the intrusion. "Upload complete," he said. "Getting out of here." The chaos virus spread through the Drachmon network like wildfire. For the first time in their existence, the collective mind experienced concepts like hope, sacrifice, and the willingness to die for strangers. Their perfect logic circuits couldn't process such beautiful insanity. Across the battlefield, Drachmon ships began firing randomly as their targeting systems failed. Ground troops stood motionless as their shared consciousness struggled with the virus. Captain O's explosives detonated just as he reached his ship. The command vessel, hub of the collective mind, erupted in green fire. The explosion sent feedback through the entire Drachmon network. For 30 seconds, every Drachmon in the system was paralyzed as their hive mind experienced what humans called chaos. In those 30 seconds, the human fleet destroyed 40 enemy ships and rescued thousands of Velthari. High Priestess Thelara stood on the bridge of the Iron Mountain, watching her world through human eyes. Half her cities were in ruins, but her people were alive. "Why?" she asked Captain Lee. "Why did you risk everything for strangers?" Lee looked at the tactical display, where human ships continued to fight against impossible odds. "Because," he said simply, "it was the right thing to do." The battle was far from over, but something had changed. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Drachmon Collective had experienced doubt, and across the galaxy, other species were beginning to hear whispers of creatures from a death world who fought not for conquest, but for hope. News of the battle in the Silent Zone spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. For the first time in recorded history, someone had fought the Drachmon and lived to tell about it. Hidden communication networks that had been silent for centuries suddenly burst with activity. General Nam Soo-jin received the reports aboard her flagship while leading training exercises near Jupiter. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and scars on her hands from a childhood spent in Earth's asteroid mining colonies. When she read Captain Lee's situation report, she made the fastest command decision of her career. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships, set course for the Silent Zone. Maximum speed." "General," her aide protested, "that's outside our patrol zone. The Galactic Council won't approve." "The Galactic Council isn't fighting for their lives," Nam replied coldly. "Our people are." Technical specialist Jin A. Rin worked frantically in the computer core of the Iron Mountain. Dr. Choi's chaos virus had worked, but only temporarily. The Drachmon Collective was adapting, creating filters to block human irrationality from their systems. "We need something stronger," Jin said, her fingers flying over the holographic controls. "Something that will make them question their entire existence." Dr. Choi joined her in the cramped computer chamber. "What if we don't just send them chaos? What if we send them humanity itself?" Together, they began uploading human concepts that no logical mind could process. Love without reason, sacrifice without reward, hope in the face of certain death. They included human art, music, poetry, and the recorded last words of every human soldier who had ever died protecting others. Meanwhile, in the deepest part of the ship, Ambassador Colthera waited in her sealed chamber. She was the last of the Zephrani, a species that had fought the Drachmon 5,000 years ago and lost. For millennia, she had hidden in the ruins of the Silent Zone, watching civilizations rise and fall. When she heard that someone was actually fighting the collective and winning battles, she knew she had to make contact. Captain Lee stood before the sealed door of her chamber, reading the message she had transmitted to his ship. "You say you fought these creatures before?" "My people held them off for 300 years, came the reply through the speaker. "We learned their weaknesses, but we lacked something that you humans possess." "What's that?" "The complete inability to know when you're beaten." Lee smiled grimly. "That sounds about right." The door slid open, revealing a tall figure in an environmental suit. Colthera was ancient even by galactic standards, but her voice was strong as she spoke. "The Drachmon Collective has one fatal flaw," she explained. "They cannot understand sacrifice. Every species they've absorbed was conquered because they surrendered when defeat was certain. They've never encountered a species that fights harder when things get worse." High Priestess Thelara had been listening from nearby. "Is that why you came to help us? Because humans fight harder when losing?" "No," Lee said, looking out at the burning planet below. "We came because you asked for help. Humans have a saying, 'No one fights alone.'" Captain Oh Minho was preparing for another stealth mission when the enemy reinforcements arrived. Through the Shadow Strike's sensors, he watched in horror as the sky filled with Drachmon ships. Hundreds of bio-vessels, each one representing absorbed civilizations. "Captain Lee," he reported quietly, "we have a problem. They've called in everything they have." On the Iron Mountains Bridge, Lieutenant Kim counted the new arrivals. 500 ships, sir. Maybe more." The human fleet now faced odds of nearly 50 to 1. Any reasonable commander would order a retreat. Lee opened a channel to all human ships. "All captains, this is Captain Lee. I won't lie to you. The odds are bad, real bad. Anyone who wants to withdraw is free to do so. No shame in living to fight another day." The responses came back immediately. "Iron Mountain, this is Thunder's Edge. We're not going anywhere." "Voidstalker here. We've come this far." Shadow Strike reporting. "Let's finish this." One by one, every ship in the human fleet chose to stay. Sergeant. Major Lim was evacuating Morvel Thari when one of his Marines approached him. "Sergeant Major, the new enemy ships are landing troops. Thousands of them." Lim looked at his small force of Marines, then at the thousands of civilians they were trying to protect. The math was simple and terrifying. "Well," he said, checking his weapon. "I guess this is where we find out what Ghost Company is really made of." Technical specialist Jin completed the upload of humanity's essence into the Chaos virus, but she needed a way to deliver it directly to the Drachmon Prime consciousness. "I have to physically connect to their central processing core," she told Captain Lee. "Someone needs to get me to their main command ship." "That's a suicide mission," Lee said flatly. Jin smiled. "Only if you don't come back for me." General Nam's reinforcement fleet was still hours away when the final battle began. The Drachmon Collective, frustrated by its inability to understand human behavior, decided to end the conflict with overwhelming force. 500 bioships surrounded the human fleet and opened fire simultaneously. The barrage was so intense that space itself seemed to burn. But the humans had spent those precious hours preparing. Chief Engineer Han had distributed her hybrid weapons to every ship. Dr. Choi had worked with the medical teams to help treat Velthari refugees. And Captain Lee had done something that no alien species had ever thought to do. He had broadcast the entire battle across the galaxy. On worlds that had been conquered by the Drachmon centuries ago, enslaved populations watched as 12 human ships fought against impossible odds for people they had never met. The broadcasts reached the underground resistance movements that had hidden in the shadows for generations. On the mining world of Kextar, worker slaves stopped their excavation and looked up at the sky. On the factory planet of Mordun, forced laborers put down their tools. On 100 worlds across the galaxy, conquered species remembered what it felt like to hope. The first act of rebellion came from a freight captain named Veltox, who rammed his cargo ship into a Drachmon patrol vessel. The explosion was seen by thousands of his people, and suddenly, cargo ships across his system were turning against their overseers. Captain Lee watched the tactical display as chaos erupted throughout Drachmon space. "They're fighting back," he said in wonder. "All of them." Commander Park was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. "Sir, I'm getting reports of uprisings on over 40 worlds. The broadcasts are inspiring them." The Drachmon Collective was suddenly fighting a war on hundreds of fronts. Species that had been docile for centuries were destroying supply ships, attacking installations, and disrupting the carefully maintained order of the Empire. Jin Irin suited up for her mission to the enemy command ship. Sergeant Major Lim had volunteered to escort her along with his best Marines. "Remember," she told them, "once I upload this virus to their core, they'll know exactly where we are. You'll have maybe 5 minutes to get out." "What about you?" Lim asked. "Someone has to make sure the upload completes," Jin said simply. "Besides, someone needs to explain to these creatures what humanity really means." As the transport ship carried them toward the massive Drachmon command vessel, Jin thought about her home on Earth. She had grown up in Seoul, in a family of engineers and artists. Her parents had taught her that the greatest honor was using your skills to help others. Now she was going to teach that lesson to a collective mind that had consumed 1,000 worlds. The battle raged around them as their ship approached the biomechanical fortress. Drachmon fighters swarmed after them, but human pilots had learned to fly in Earth's chaotic atmosphere. They danced between enemy fire with moves that defied alien logic. "Approaching target," the pilot reported. "Beginning infiltration run." Behind them, General Nam's reinforcement fleet appeared at the edge of the system. 50 more human warships, arriving just as the battle reached its climax. But the real reinforcements were coming from unexpected places. Across the galaxy, enslaved species were breaking their chains and striking back at their oppressors. The Drachmon Collective, designed to control through perfect order, found itself drowning in beautiful chaos. Jin looked out at the enemy command, ship growing larger in the view screen. Somewhere inside that biomechanical horror was the consciousness that had orchestrated 3,000 years of conquest. "Time to teach them about humanity," she said quietly. The Drachmon command ship was a living nightmare made of metal and flesh. Sergeant Major Lim led his Marines through corridors that pulsed like arteries, past walls that watched them with organic eyes. The ship's immune system sent antibodies. After them, creatures that were part white blood cell, part killing machine. "This way," Jin Aaron called, following her scanner toward the central processing core. The device was tracking the bioelectrical patterns that controlled the collective mind. Behind them, Lim's Marines fought a running battle against the ship's defenses. Every corridor brought new horrors, defensive systems that had been created from the absorbed technology of 100 conquered species. "How much farther?" Lim asked, firing at something that looked like a mechanical spider with too many teeth. "2 more levels," Jin replied, hacking through a security door with her portable computer. "The core should be just ahead, on the iron." Mountain's Bridge, Captain Lee watched the battle raging around them. General Nam's reinforcements had evened the odds, but the Drachmon were fighting with the fury of a cornered animal. Both sides were taking heavy losses. "Captain," Commander Park reported, "I'm getting signals from across the galaxy. The rebellions are spreading faster than we ever imagined." The tactical display showed the Drachmon Empire in chaos, on World. After world-conquered species were rising up against their oppressors. Ships that had carried Drachmon supplies for centuries were suddenly turning their weapons against patrol vessels. Dr. Choi monitored the enemy communications with growing excitement. "The collective is fracturing," she announced. "They're trying to process too many uprisings at once. Their perfect order is collapsing." High Priestess Thelara stood beside Captain Lee, watching her people fight alongside human Marines on the planet below. "How did you know this would happen?" she asked. "We didn't," Lee admitted, "but humans have learned something over the centuries. Hope is contagious. All it takes is one person willing to stand up and fight back." Jin reached the central processing core and stopped in amazement. The chamber was enormous, filled with a biomechanical brain that pulsed with the thoughts of the collective mind. Cables and organic tubes connected it to every part of the ship, and through them, to every Drachmon in the galaxy. "This is it," she whispered. "The heart of their empire." The Drachmon Prime consciousness noticed her presence immediately. Screens around the chamber lit up with images of destruction as the collective tried to intimidate her. "You are too late." "Small creature," the voice came from everywhere at once. "Your species will be absorbed, just like all the others." Jin began connecting her equipment to the core systems. "You don't understand us at all, do you?" "We understand everything. We have absorbed the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. But you've never absorbed their hearts," Jin said, beginning the upload. "You've never understood why someone would die for a stranger." The chaos virus began spreading through the collective consciousness, but this time it carried something more than random thoughts. It carried the complete essence of human experience. Every act of selfless courage, every moment of sacrifice, every time someone had chosen to help others at their own expense. Sergeant Major Lim and his Marines reached the core chamber just as the upload began. Around them, the ship's defenses went berserk as the collective mind experienced something it had never felt before. "Jin, we need to go," Lim shouted over the alarms. "Not yet," she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "I need to make sure it reaches every part of their network." The Drachmon Prime tried to fight back, sending security programs to destroy the virus. But human concepts like love, friendship, and sacrifice couldn't be deleted like normal data. They infected the very core of the collective's being. Across the galaxy, Drachmon ships began shutting down as their crews experienced emotions for the first time. 3,000 years of suppressed individuality suddenly exploded back to life, as the absorbed consciousnesses remembered who they had been before joining the collective. On the bridge of the Iron Mountain, Lieutenant Kim watched his sensors in amazement. "Captain, the enemy fleet is breaking apart. Ships are just stopping." Some Drachmon vessels exploded as their biomechanical systems overloaded. Others drifted helplessly as their crews struggled with newfound independence. A few actually turned their weapons on other Drachmon ships, their absorbed personalities choosing freedom over slavery. Jin completed the upload just as the core chamber began collapsing around them. The collective mind was literally tearing itself apart as it tried to process human emotions. "Now we run!" she shouted. Lim's Marines fought their way back through corridors that were dying around them. The ship's immune system had turned against itself, attacking everything it could find. Organic walls peeled away from metal frameworks as the vessel consumed itself from within. They reached their transport ship with seconds to spare. As they lifted off, the command vessel exploded behind them in a cascade of green fire. The destruction sent shockwaves through the collective consciousness, freeing billions of absorbed minds across the galaxy. Admiral Yoon Jae-sung watched the aftermath from his command ship. Drachmon vessels throughout the system were either destroyed or helpless. The survivors were broadcasting surrender signals in dozens of different languages as their crews rediscovered their original identities. "It's over," he said quietly. "They're finished." But Captain Lee knew it was more than that. "No, sir," he said. "It's just beginning." The rebellions that had started during the battle continued to spread. Species that had been enslaved for millennia were tasting freedom for the first time. The careful order of the Drachmon Empire collapsed as world after world declared independence. High Priestess Thelara organized relief efforts for her people with help from human medical teams. Dr. Choi worked alongside Velthari healers, sharing techniques for treating both physical and psychological trauma. "Our cities can be rebuilt," Thelara told Captain Lee as they surveyed the damage to her world. "But what you've given us is more important than buildings. You've given us hope." Within weeks, representatives from dozens of formerly enslaved species began arriving in the Kethvar system. They came seeking the humans who had started the revolution, wanting to learn how 12 ships had defeated an empire. Ambassador Colthera emerged from hiding to help establish the new alliance of free worlds. "My people fought the Drachmon for 3 centuries, she told the assembled delegates. "But we only thought about surviving. The humans taught us to think about living." General Nam was chosen to lead the Alliance Defense Fleet, with human officers training former slaves in the art of protecting freedom. Chief Engineer Han established technical exchange programs, teaching alien engineers how to combine their knowledge with human creativity. Sergeant Major Lim's Ghost Company became the training cadre for the Alliance Marines, teaching former slave warriors that the strongest weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but the willingness to fight for something greater than yourself. Captain Lee found himself promoted to admiral, tasked with exploring the galaxy and making contact with other species that might need help. The Iron Mountain became the flagship of a new kind of fleet, one that went looking for people in trouble instead of waiting for orders. Jin A-Rin received the Alliance's highest honor for her role in defeating the Collective, but she preferred her new job, establishing communication networks between the freed worlds, making sure that no one would ever fight alone again. On Earth, the news of humanity's victory spread through every city and colony. Children learned about the battle in their history classes, but more importantly, they learned about the choice that Captain Lee and his crew had made when they decided to answer a call for help from strangers. The galaxy was a different place now. Where once there had been the ordered tyranny of the Drachmon Empire, there was now a growing alliance of free peoples. They came in all shapes and sizes from dozens of different worlds, but they shared one thing in common. They had learned from humanity that the greatest strength wasn't in being impossible to kill, but in knowing what was worth dying for. High Priestess Thelara stood in her rebuilt temple, looking up at the stars through the crystal dome. Somewhere out there, human ships were patrolling the space lanes, making sure that no one who called for help would be ignored. She pressed her hand against the warm crystal wall, feeling the pulse of her healing world beneath her fingers. The distance, she could hear the sounds of construction as her people rebuilt their cities, but also the voices of alien visitors who had come to learn about freedom. The Velthari had a new saying now, one they had learned from their human saviors. No one fights alone. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds where beings had never known hope, that simple promise was changing everything. The age of the Deathworlders had begun, and with it, a new chapter in galactic history. Not an age of conquest or domination, but an age where the strong protected the weak, where courage was more valued than power, and where the call for help would never go unanswered, because that was what humans did. Someone called for help, and they answered.